from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. Out of Iowa State University, Lee Schulz provides this week's insight on the cattle markets. He'll review the USDA's latest cattle on feed report. And Lee talks about what the sharp rally in the hog market means to the cattle trade. He thinks that could have a lasting impact. Also, highlights from the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. This time, Bob Larson and Brad White talk about two cow-calf management topics, analyzing calf abortion problems in the herd and managing cows following calving toward a regular cycling pattern going into spring breeding. And on this week's 4-H segment, K-State's Deryl Waldren talks with Britton Rucker about the IFI program. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Glad to have you along with us on this Monday as we take up the cattle market trends once more. And joining us via phone this time around from his office in Ames, Iowa, Iowa State University livestock economist Lee Schulz. Lee, we do want to devote some time to what your state, Iowa, and the neighboring state to the west, Nebraska, are undergoing in as far as the aftermath of the flooding and the repercussions for the cattle markets as you would perceive them. It's been a rough week and a half or so, but before we get to that, the recap of the trade last week, the fed cattle market did manage to gain some ground.
Yes, we did see quite a bit of support when you look at the near-term April contract as well as the more deferred. We've seen anywhere from about $1 up to $2 to $3 up for the week. I think it is really kind of the transition a bit here in the market as we see the weather improving, albeit a little slower than we would like. I think you're starting to see a little bit of an uptick in demand. You're seeing some spillover from some other markets, obviously, and I think all that collectively gave us a rather supportive market. Now, when we look at the cash market, though, I think we've been really seasonally lower. We haven't seen the basis levels that we've seen the past couple of years. So you can kind of look at that two ways. I think we're keeping a little bit of lid on the market, but also I think there is some potential there because of the basis and strength we've seen the last couple of years. If we do see some continued positive movement in the market, you could see a bit of a rally here.
What do you read from the boxed beef trade last week? Was that supportive as well?
I think given the supplies that we've seen, really, if you look compared to a week ago, slaughter was up 42,000 head or 7%. If you look even compared to a year ago, we were up about 1%. So box prices, I think, are starting to flatten out maybe a little bit. I think that's packers trying to keep a little bit of a lid on prices. But given where we're at currently, seasonally, I think there is still some potential there. I think it is kind of that resistance we're holding both in the box trade at that 230 level and the 130 level in the futures market. If we can kind of push through some of that resistance, I think there is potential for some continued rally.
And one would have to think seasonally we would see improvement there as we eventually get into weather that would look like grilling season, if you will.
Yes, we've already really seen from retailers, I think they've begun to really ramp up their featuring. They're really moving from grilling cuts in the rib, chuck, round, and ground beef items. We're seeing quite a bit more ad space there. You're seeing a little bit, less from the loin and brisket as we're transitioning into that period. Maybe a little bit of this tough winter and the slow spring, I think maybe has pushed this off a little bit. But if we're going to see that real spur in demand, I think the market's anticipating it. It's really going to heat up now.
Well, the USDA, Lee, on Friday posted another cattle on feed report. This is the second within the month of March, although this one is considered to be the more current of the two. and it did provide something unexpected in the way of the placements number.
It did. The placements number, that number does get quite a bit of range when we look at pre-report expectations. Really, that range was from about 92% of a year ago to about 101.5% of a year ago. We came in at 2% higher than a year ago, so that was 6% higher than the average of that wide range. And so I think that was a bit of a surprise in this report, given kind of where the expectations were. Realizing I think it is harder and harder to get a handle on what that placement number is. Collectively, we've seen cattle on feed numbers up 1%, and that was pretty much in line with pre-report expectations. So I wouldn't take this report as too unexpected. We really still arrived at kind of where we thought the cattle on feed number was going to be. Likely not to see too much reaction from the report. We expect placements to really be ramping up. I think that's going to really occur here in the next several months as we've had weather issues with marketings of those calves and placements of those calves. We know those calves are coming now, and so expect that number to be higher here the next several months, but I think that's really priced into the market currently.
The surge in the hog market is not to be ignored here, and whatever spillover effects that may have on the beef cattle trade. It's been remarkable to see what's going on in the pork complex in the recent week and a half, Lee.
Really unbelievable with the limit moves we've seen. Really, we've taken summer contracts from the 70s, mid-70s, all the way up to almost $100 per hundredweight, really in about 10 days. Really remarkable. All this is really related to the reported news that the Chinese pig population has reduced maybe 15 to 20%. Maybe that's even understated given kind of the controlled nature of news out of China. And so it's really looking at there's tremendous losses. We know that China is really ramping up their purchases of pork, not only from their partners like the European Union, but the United States. We've seen a large purchase here a week or two ago, really the largest purchase in 2 years. And so that shows, even with the tariffs in place that we currently have with China, that they're buying pork, and so they're really in need of pork. We're starting to see a spillover in the cattle market, as I think we're really seeing the need for protein demand increasing on the international market. Likely not maybe a whole lot of increase of purchases of U.S. beef for China, but I think really just the fact that pork market is so strong, I think you're seeing that spill over into the other proteins. Also, I think what you're seeing is a bit of the funds money. Open interest is really large right now, and so as commodities, you're seeing this volatility. You're seeing investors into these markets, and that's really providing some support currently.
And one would think that the problems in China with African swine fever won't be abated for a while, and therefore they may still be in the market for some time, and therefore we would see this carryover from the pork sector support other competing meats to a certain extent for a time anyway, Lee.
Yes, this isn't a short-lived thing. We're talking likely years of the impact in China. Now, the impact here in the U.S. on our markets, or the strength in those markets, I think is something that is still evolving. But especially, I think when you look at the deferred contracts are the ones that have really shown the strength, and I think the spillover from the hog market, especially as we expected the largest impact, or at least the first largest impact from the Chinese depopulation of the pigs this summer, and that's where you're really starting to see the strength in the cattle markets. And so, yes, I think we're going to continue to see support probably for those deferred markets as long as we continue to see support in the hogs.
Well, as everybody is well aware, the difficulties to Kansas north and east in Iowa and Nebraska, well documented now with the astronomical flooding and the impact on a number of things agriculturally, not the least of which the beef cattle sector. Toss in Nebraska the blizzard that preceded the flooding. And your take on what all of this is suggesting in as far as an impact in the cattle markets. Too soon to tell, Lee?
Well, certainly the situation's still unfolding as we're getting reports of additional moisture rain here in the coming week, and so I think it's pretty impossible, at least yet, to really determine the extent of the impact on cattle numbers and prices. And I would really group it's more recent weather. As you mentioned, it's not just the flooding, it's also the blizzard that predated that. It's really the polar vortex that was not that long ago. So it's really this weather situation, I think, had a noticeable impact on the cattle market. As you look at, we've likely had delayed fed cattle marketings, I think delayed placements into feedlots. I think that's some of what you picked up a little bit in the Cattle on Feed report, that we're catching up a little bit in those placements just because it was difficult to get those cattle marketed. Now, I think the thing we need to think about is, whether or not these weather impacts are widespread enough to have an overall impact on the cattle market. Certainly, they're having an impact in the locations where we've seen the most drastic weather. I can look at here western Iowa and Nebraska, where, continuity of business, kind of commerce has been impacted just because, we've been dealing with the flood. We haven't been able to market the cattle, place the cattle as we typically would. But when you look at the overall impact on the cattle market, I think we're looking at this more as a national standpoint. I don't know if we've seen widespread weather enough to really see a huge noticeable impact on national prices.
Not to discount the troubles that this has caused at the local level by the same token, though. The markets at the stricken areas will be clearly impeded for some time.
Well, and I certainly, don't want to leave aside the impact that really there's significant and long-lasting financial impacts for these operations and families that are affected. Now, the agriculture industry is very resilient, and so, these families, these farms will recover, but, this has been a major stress and major impact on their operations.
Indeed. Lee, we appreciate your input on the markets and these factors, and we will catch up with you again in a few weeks. Appreciate your time right here.
Thank you.
Lee Schulz, livestock economist, Iowa State University, providing those remarks on the cattle market trends for us on this Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today is back now, and for you cow-calf producers, information that was featured in the latest Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State. 2 of the BCI staff, veterinarians Bob Larson and Brad White, exchanged thoughts on a couple of calving and post-calving topics that could answer some prevalent questions you might have. Here's Brad to lead things off.
One of the issues that we see on cow-calf operations is occasionally we have a cow have an abortion. What should I do? If I see that, if I find an abortion, and at this time of year, I might actually see that aborted fetus.
Might be a pretty good-sized fetus, yeah. Well, a couple of things is, first of all, I think it's important to recognize it's not necessarily a reason to panic, in that pregnancy is a complex set of things that all have to go pretty well to have a good, safe pregnancy all the way through. And so it doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a lot wrong for 1 or 2 cows out of a large group to have an abortion. But it could also be the sign that there is a problem. And so one of the first things is deciding whether is this a no problem, a small problem, or a large problem.
Now, how do I know if, because you get to this time of year, I've got cows that she may have been due to calve. Do I know if it was a difficult calving that the calf died versus an aborted fetus that came early and it died and then maybe came out of the cow? Anything I can do to kind of...
Well, there's a few things. First of all, those cows will fool me once in a while, in that I think for sure she's pregnant but I can't find a calf, and it's possible that she was never pregnant. Now, one of the ways you can do it is you can actually look in the vulva, and if there's some indications that she's calved recently. Usually there's some bruising, maybe some indication that she did pass a calf through the birth canal. Then you go looking for that calf.
Probably was for...
Right, and hopefully a live calf, but it may not be. It may be a dead calf, and you put that down to a stillbirth or a difficult calving or something like that. If I find an aborted fetus, and a lot of times that cow will have a retained placenta. Not always, but oftentimes if she has an abortion, she doesn't clean right away. And so she's got a retained placenta. And so if I can find that aborted fetus, that I'd like to take it to my veterinarian, and we'll talk about what we want to do with that aborted fetus.
Talk about maybe the next steps. But you said occasionally, sometimes it just happens. Trauma, anything can cause this? Or what would we do to?
Yeah, the list of things that can cause an abortion is pretty long. It can be, cow trauma, although those cows are pretty tough, and it takes a pretty significant trauma for a good, healthy pregnancy to be lost that way. It's not impossible.
If it's near term.
Right. It's not impossible, but that's not really very likely at that point. But we have poisonous plants. We have some just kind of genetic defects, and these are not genetic defects that are passed from one generation to the next. There's just the complexity of that cell division. You can lose some calves
within
that way.
That individual.
Yeah, within that individual, not a family issue, not going through the family of cows, but in that individual, the genetics aren't quite right to go through gestation. You've got some viruses that can cause abortions, some bacteria that can cause abortions, and a lot of those they're relatively common. They're present in the environment. They're present in the herd, and usually most cows have enough immunity that they're not going to be affected by that. So those are all potential factors. Another one is moldy hay, moldy feed. Usually doesn't cause a lot of cows to abort, but it can cause a few.
So sporadic problems, there's probably not a lot of... If it's your herd,
right,
you have a sporadic problem, you have one cow that aborts, it's not good, you're not happy about it, but you may not take immediate actions.
Yeah, and the reason I'm not going to take immediate action is because it's probably not indicating that the rest of my cows are at a particular high risk, or that I'll have a particular problem next year either.
It's an individual problem.
It's an individual. Bad things happen once in a while. Not a reason to panic, not a reason to get too excited. But the problem becomes, what if it isn't just one or two cows? What if it's now 5 or 6 or 7 cows, out of 100 or 200? Well, that's a lot more than I would expect. And so now I need to act.
So how many would you expect?
All right. So the actual number of probably abortions that you'd expect just to happen in cow herds is going to be around 2-3% or less. But at that 2% level, I don't get very excited because of, again, that's just the complexity of maintaining a pregnancy all the way through. It's not uncommon for 2 out of 100 to not make it all the way through a pregnancy.
So 1-2%. If it's above that, then I start to
think that something's a little bit different. Now, again, a little bit above that still may indicate that, this isn't necessarily a problem we need to worry about as a year-to-year problem. It was a one-time because of the circumstances this year. But I'm starting to pay more attention and want to keep a few more records about what's going on.
Excellent. And so that would be an area where early on you capture some of those records, and then we see if it becomes a problem. But it's something to watch for, and we certainly see that in our cow herds, that there will be abortions either observed or unobserved showing up as that cow that doesn't have a calf.
Yeah, so those records that I want to keep is something about the cow. So how old is she? Is this a heifer? Is this her first calf, or is it an older cow? What pasture has she been in recently? Just a few pieces of information. And what I'm looking for there is a pattern. The few abortions that I see, are they all in the heifers, or are they all in the cows out of one pasture? Those are the types of things I'm looking for is a pattern. So that I want to keep the records that allow me to ask those questions.
Allow you to look and see that pattern. And I think that's a great area where you're going to get your veterinarian involved. You're going to get somebody that you work with that sees some of those patterns and is able to help you figure that out. Now let's talk about after calving, and people will talk about postpartum interval, or the period between when she calves and when she gets pregnant. But a lot of times we may describe that as an anestrus period, or a period where that cow's not cycling. So maybe from a reproductive standpoint, after a cow calves, what's going on with her?
Well, there's a number of things that have to happen. First of all, and a lot of people can easily recognize, well, that whole uterus needs to get, it's held a large calf with lots of fluid in there, so all that needs to shrink down and to kind of go through a healing process and be ready to get pregnant again. But, we know that cows can get pregnant relatively soon after they just calved. And by relatively soon, I'm talking 3 weeks or so. And
but
so
that's not the norm.
That's not the norm. No, it isn't. But the point there being that a lot of times those cows, the uterus may or may not be completely back to its normal size, but it's still in good enough shape to start the next pregnancy. All right. And that's what I mean by that's not really the limiting factor unless we have some problems like a uterine infection or something like that. And that can then directly increase the amount of time it takes before that cow starts to have fertile heats again. But the big thing is actually going on in her brain, I will say. And there's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and the pituitary is right below that. They secrete the hormones that control the heat cycle, the estrus cycle in cows. And after a long term of pregnancy, when she's not having cycles every 21 days, it takes a while to get those parts of the brain back in that pattern. You got to get them
geared back up.
Because it's not a constant secretion of these hormones. They're in a 21-day pattern. And so it takes a while to get that pattern reestablished in their brain. And that's going to take typically about 50 to 60 days for the average cow to return to fertile cycles.
And is this similar to when we talk about heifers coming on and they start cycling? They may be a little bit sporadic as they start to cycle. Is that a similar type process that's going on?
Yes. A lot of times, if you really watch your cows closely, the first heat is followed in less than 21 days by another heat. But then after that point, then pretty much typically they're in their 21-day heat cycles after that.
So when we talk about, and we're going to talk about synchronization programs on one of our upcoming episodes, but when we talk about synchronization programs and using hormones to kind of adjust the cycling on those cows, what you're saying, or I think I hear you saying, is if her cellular machinery and the hormones aren't running well, we can't just jumpstart her with something external.
Yeah, I mean, well, we do talk about jumpstarting cows, meaning that we can speed up that process before she resumes fertile cycles, but only so much. The way I like to tell students is you can nudge Mother Nature, but you can't fool her. And so the cow needs to be close to when she would be starting to have fertile cycles again, and we can speed that up a little bit with some of the synchronization protocols we use. But you're not going to take a cow that is many days away from resuming fertile cycles and tricking her into doing it earlier.
For our BCI Cattle Chat checklist today, we came up with the top 6 things that influence the postpartum anestrus period in cattle.
All right, number 6 is if that cow has a difficult birth or a retained placenta, it's going to take her longer to return to fertile cycles.
Number 5, the amount of nutrition that she has available as she goes through calving and the postpartum period.
Number 4 is what we call the Julian date of calving, or basically what day of the year. In that we know it takes them a little bit longer at this part of the world anyway if they calve in January versus if they calve in March or April. And so the longer day length, better forage, shorter time to return to fertile cycles.
Number 3, what was her change in body condition between calving and breeding? So always we expect a little bit of a drop there, but if that drop is severe, it will take her longer to start cycling again.
All right. So, and then another important one is number 2, body condition score at calving. Because if she calves in good body condition, even if she does lose a little bit of weight, she's still in good condition to have a short time period before she returns to fertile cycles.
Number 1, age. Heifers are going to take 90 to 100 days, cows 50 to 60 days on average. So when they have their first calf, it is going to take longer to return to cyclicity.
K-State's Brad White and Bob Larson of the Beef Cattle Institute. There's much more to this latest Cattle Chat podcast. You can take it all in at beefcattleinstitute.org, beefcattleinstitute.org. This is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson with you. Now today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN, and beginning with an update on the Missouri River Basin flooding situation. Iowa's agriculture losses are now tabbed at a preliminary $214 million, with total flooding losses of about $1.6 billion, according to a request by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds to President Trump for a major disaster declaration for that state. In the letter to the president, Reynolds asked for public and individual assistance for 57 counties along the Missouri and in other areas of Iowa as well. The request details damage to agriculture, homes, businesses, and levees. During a Missouri River Basin stakeholder call on Friday, representatives with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said that water releases at Gavin's Point Dam in South Dakota remained at 24,000 cubic feet per second. The goal there is to reduce releases down to 20,000 cubic feet per second as the pool at the dam starts to fall. As of Friday morning, Corps officials said the water is beginning to drop. Now, the Corps said it doesn't expect the gauges along the basin to rise in the coming days to the record levels seen last week. Corps officials are monitoring the Big Sioux and the Vermilion rivers in eastern South Dakota as snow there has begun melting. The Big Sioux has been rising. It's forecast to fall in the next week or so. Missouri Governor Mike Parson has declared a state of emergency in response to the growing floods in the Missouri and Mississippi rivers in that state. And again, preliminary estimates put Nebraska's agriculture losses near the $1 billion mark. That number still is expected to rise. Disaster programs available through the Farm Service Agency can help flood-impacted producers in the Western Corn Belt with their recovery. Here's more on that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
The President on Thursday did declare a number of counties in Nebraska as federal disaster areas
from recent heavy flooding. And the administrator of USDA's Farm Service Agency, Richard Fordyce, says that means regarding FSA,
folks in those counties or contiguous counties to those counties in the declaration can qualify now for low-interest loans
through local FSA offices in impacted areas. The administrator adds additional programs are available for producers impacted by flooding along parts of the Western Corn Belt to assist with recovery efforts.
Producers can get resources at farmers.gov under the Recover section, and there's resources there and explanation of programs.
From FSA as well as across the USDA spectrum. Administrator Fordyce adds, in addition to the local FSA offices in impacted areas, staff there are also conducting outreach.
We have an eGov delivery system that will send text messages and notifications to farmers the old-fashioned way of picking up the telephone and giving them a call.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Additionally, a procedural vote in the Senate could come tomorrow on a disaster aid plan in the Senate. Details are uncertain just yet. There's likely some consideration being given to the heavy Midwest flooding situation. That version most recently was for $14.2 billion. A House-passed supplemental appropriations bill would authorize $3 billion in assistance for agricultural losses, largely directed at hurricane damage to crops in the Southeast. But some think that the Midwest flooding will give lawmakers some pause and that they will include amounts for those affected producers. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue expressed views that the Midwest flooding aid should be included in any aid plan, as USDA disaster assistance programs are unlikely to be sufficient. As African swine fever spreads through Asia and Eastern Europe, U.S. hog producers are now being urged to boost biosecurity measures and to watch their herds closely for signs of sickness. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
In the battle against terrorism, we're regularly told if you see something, say something. Well, that same basic advice is being given to the nation's hog producers in the battle against African swine fever.
Please be vigilant. If your pigs are sick, report it immediately.
That's USDA's Chief Veterinarian, Dr. Jack Shear, coming from a new video just released along with some new information and tips for hog producers and veterinarians. While efforts continue to keep this pig disease out of the U.S., Shear says if it does show up here,
we have response plans in place and incident management teams ready to deploy should a detection occur in the United States.
But the key to containing an outbreak is speed. Producers constantly watching for serious sickness in the herd, very quickly reporting it. Shear says there's a toll-free number for that. Here goes.
1-866-536-7593.
Again.
1-866-536-7593. 536-7593.
For information on biosecurity and more, visit USDA's African Swine Fever webpage. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And a U.S. trade negotiating delegation will be in Beijing late this week, led by U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. The two will be visiting for 2 days for another round of trade negotiations with Chinese Vice Premier Liu He. And they're hoping to button down an agreement between the two countries by the end of April. Now on to this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State Forester Charlie Barden standing by. Charlie?
This year, Kansas will be hosting the National Walnut Council meeting from June 16th to 19th at the Prairie Bandit Casino and Resort just north of Topeka. This opportunity only comes around every once in a while, so if you have any interest in growing black walnut or managing your woodland, I encourage you to attend. The meeting will consist of several field trips as well as indoor seminars taught by national and regional experts in forest management and black walnut. The black walnut wood is the most valuable in the whole country, and in Kansas has over 25 million black walnut trees growing. Each year, the harvesting of black walnut timber, veneer, and nuts contributes millions of dollars to the local Kansas economy. One of the tourist sites we will highlight is the tree farm portion of the Copperhead Hill Ranch in Jefferson County, just south of Valley Falls, owned and operated by John and Karen Buchanan. The Buchanans have taken a very intensive approach to converting some of their cedar and honey locust-infested hayfields into walnut, oak, and black cherry alley cropping systems. In a multi-year process, they first clear the field of any unwanted trees, then the grass is removed from a 6-foot by 6-foot planting location. They take composted hog manure and deep till it at each spot where a walnut, oak, or cherry tree is planted, and then protected by a tree shelter. During the summer droughts, they even water the new seedlings, and the results have been amazing. Virtually all seedlings are over 6 feet tall after just 2 growing seasons, and many are approaching 10 feet. The rows are widely spaced, so the harvesting of the hay crop can continue uninterrupted. Other field trips include stops at Perry Lake Wildlife Area for a flying drone demonstration and the sawmill and grading of walnut logs. Meeting registration materials can be found at the Walnut Council website at www.walnutcouncil.org. I hope to see you June 16th and 19th at the Walnut Council meeting. Again, that website for registration materials is www.walnutcouncil.org. This opportunity does not come around very often. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, Forest of K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Charlie. Britton Rucker has this week's 4-H segment. Next on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. As summer is quickly approaching, Kansas 4-H is seeking counties and or districts for their 2019 Kansas 4-H Japanese Exchange Program. With me now is 4-H Youth Development Specialist Deryl Waldren. Deryl, when does this program start and what is the history?
We're looking currently right now for Kansas 4-H families to host Japanese youth from July 23rd to August 17th in Kansas. So these Japanese youth, and this year we're going to have 23 youth and 3 adult chaperones will be coming to Kansas, and then they spend almost 4 weeks, 3.5 weeks with a host family. So we're looking for families currently right now.
And what all does this program entail?
Well, we are looking for families that have youth that closely match the age of the Japanese, and with 23 Japanese youth coming in the summer, they're mostly 12, 13, and 14-year-olds. In fact, they all are. So we have to have a host sibling, the same gender, plus or minus 2 years. So if the Japanese youth is 13, the host family sibling has to be from 11 to 15. So there has to be a similar age so that they have hopefully similar interests and developmental needs, that kind of thing.
Right, and you can go online and look at the Japanese exchange students' interest, correct?
Right, we actually did one better. We did an email message to all Kansas 4-H families with youth between 10 and 16, sending them about this opportunity earlier this month. So we've already indicated to them that they have a wonderful opportunity for their host family to participate in this summer from, as I said, July 23rd to August 17th.
And what are the benefits that comes along with hosting a Japanese exchange student?
Well, there are several, and one of them would be to increase a family's cross-cultural and global understanding, and they definitely get that by hosting a Japanese youth. They're going to broaden their family communication skills because these Japanese youth, when they come in, even though they've been learning English, they come in with limited English skills. But in that 4 weeks, you can see vast improvements in their English skills. So they're going to have to be a bit creative in the beginning on how to communicate without, both speaking English really well. Obviously, the Japanese won't, but there are computers that do the Google translation or other translation programs that make it much easier. They're obviously hopefully going to make a new friend from another country, Japan, and they're going to have a lot of fun while learning about Japan in their own home.
And these students are really immersed into their family life.
That is the point of it. They're often their families of these Japanese youth have signed them up at birth to go on this exchange program, and they can go at age 12, and many of them do go at 12, and this is their first international experience. Not their only one, but the one of many where they will have opportunities to learn and speak English. And we know the best way, or one of the best ways, is to be culturally immersed with a family, living and doing and experiencing what that family does, and that's been the backbone and the cornerstone of this Kansas 4-H Japanese exchange, as I said, since 1977.
Right. Are there some training and resources available to these families before they get the exchange student?
Well, once they get signed up and they fill out the application, and it's a digital application all online now, it's much easier than it used to be, they will get an orientation from our Japanese exchange coordinator, Rose Scott, who does that orientation with families so that they are better prepared and know what to expect when the Japanese youth arrives on July 23rd.
You mentioned before, but how would people get involved if they wanted to host a Japanese exchange student this summer?
If they were looking for the application, the easiest way is to go to the Kansas 4-H page, and that address or URL is www.kansas4-h.org. And then on the right side, you'll see what's hot, and they can click on hosting for this summer and click on that, and that'll take them to the link where that they would fill out the application. So the application's online, like I said, and they can fill it out at any time they want. And so hit submit, and it all goes in. And then Rose Scott is the coordinator, and she'll be following up with them. And her phone number is 785-388-2009, or her email is 60kid2, and that's SIXTYKID2@gmail.com.
And you do have a lot of students involved with this program. How many were hosted in 2018, and how many do you plan on 2019?
Last year we hosted 28 total. That would be 25 youth and 3 adults. And this year we're tentatively down for 23 youth and 3 adult chaperones. And those chaperones come with the youth, and they are available 24/7 if there are any issues with families to be able to take care. And they all have their own phones when they get here, and they can quickly communicate by phone or other means with the Japanese students so that there are issues that need to be sorted out. So it's not like you're on your own without any help. There is help if something does come up.
And again, what are the dates that you would be hosting, and what is the last day to sign up to host a student?
Well, the dates that they're with their host families, again, is July 23rd to August 17th. They actually come in on July 21, and we have a 3-day orientation at Rock Springs 4-H Center to get them acclimated and get them over jet lag. They go with the host families, and they come back at the end for a debriefing on August 17th, and they fly out then on August 18th. And we're now looking for families and actively recruiting them. Rose is working with them and following up. We hope to have everybody placed by June 1, but we will be actively recruiting families till, when they arrive in the U.S. on July 21. But the last couple of years, we've had it all wrapped up by June 1, which is a wonderful feeling to have all the Japanese youth and chaperones placed with Kansas 4-H host families. We will have other opportunities for Kansas 4-H host families to host other exchange youth. We also participate with the Kansas IFI program, International 4-H Youth Exchange, and we will have from 3 to 5 IFIs coming to Kansas from June through September, and they will. Currently, we have young adults from 16 to in their 20s coming from Switzerland, Germany, and Greece. So we'll also be promoting that opportunity later on. And again, they live with host families and do as the host families do.
Would that be the same place that you would go to sign up for that?
Yep, it's on the same page, but a different section of it, and it says specifically it's for IFI and not for Japanese.
Very good. Well, Deryl, this program seems like a fantastic educational and fulfilling program to get involved with this summer. Thanks again, Deryl.
It is. Thank you very much. It's been a delight to talk with you.
If you think your county might be interested or to find out more details about your county or district hosting Japanese youth from ages 12 to 18 in 2019, contact Rose Scott at 785-388-2009. Please consider trying this popular program this summer. That concludes this week's 4-H segment. That's our time for today. For Eric Atkinson, this is Britton Rucker, and this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.